Welcome everyone. You asked for a long time for a comparison of attack versus crit damage. And finally, I have some conclusions and can give you some insight. Because this topic is very individual for each hero and it depends on the overall setup, I focus on giving a more general understanding of the scaling between these two attributes. For this, I will use different Excel tables with damage values calculated for different combinations of attack and crit damage for different defense reduction values. Normally, I would compute such problems, because every hero is different, and the optimum may vary for each hero. Because showing actual numbers on the screen, I think, is better for developing an understanding of how attack and crit damage interact with each other. I delayed this video a bit since I felt I need to understand how damage works in Watcher of Realms better before I make wrong conclusions. But here we go now. In this video, I will first give you a general idea of how attack and crit damage scale with each other, and in the most optimal scenario, at which attack value we start to stack crit damage. Also, I will speak about how much attack is needed for different defense penetration levels. For example, when a 30% defense reduction debuff is applied to the target. After this, I will go over what scales better, attack as a secondary attribute or crit damage. Also, I will compare different base attack values and how well attack bonus gear is scaling with them versus crit damage gear. For the comparison between attack and crit damage, I use the damage formula for Abyss 1. Because this is so far the dungeon with the first damage scaling, and also the boss is an endgame encounter. Therefore we optimize our gear towards him anyway. And for this, we want to know if we have to choose between two gear bases, which one gives my DPS. How I want to present the results took me a while to figure out, because it's not always simple to visualize a three-dimensional problem. Because in the attack versus crit damage scenario, we have two variables which influence the final damage. Therefore, it's a more complex problem, and it is not possible to just show the relation between them in a simple common diagram, where one value is fitted on the x-axis and the other one on the y-axis. So we would need a third axis. Personally, I like to present three-dimensional data in heat maps, because they're easy to create, and also a table can be some sort of a heat map already. A heat map is a presentation for data where one variable is plotted on the x-axis and the other one on the y-axis. The result is shown in different colors, where for example the better or higher numbers are represented in green color, and the lower in a red. Accordingly, I made an Excel sheet where we put different possible attack values a hero can have after deployment in one row. The row where I've brought in the attack values is representing the x-axis in our diagram. The crit damage values I put accordingly in a column which represents the y-axis of our diagram. In the Excel fields between the attack and crit damage values, I calculated for each combination of attack and crit damage the resulting damage. I did this for attack values up to 46,500 and critical damage values from 150 to 425% crit damage. For the calculation, I assumed a crit rate of 100% because we aim for this value anyway, because this is where crit damage becomes the most efficient. Afterwards, I created the same table for different values for defense penetration to give an idea of how the needed attack evolves with increasing defense penetration. Even the tables I created are not the handiest one. I think they are better than none and give a good orientation, and therefore I will make them available via Google Sheets. You will find a link right below in the video description. In case you wonder now that I've gone up to 46,500 attack because you only see like 80,900 in your hero information screen, that's because after deployment, the Pantheon bonus and deployment bonus, like the faction bonus, are applied to the attack shown in the information box. For example, a hero with 7,500 base attack, 3 parts of 66% attack bonus gear, and a 33 attack bonus on weapon and chest, with an additional attack of 3,620 from gear, together with the faction bonus and Pantheon bonus, and also another deployment bonus from artifacts, plus let's say 2000 attack from the artifact attributes, adds up to about 46,000 attack in a fight after deployment. In my data representation, I also kept the numbers and didn't color grade them for a reason. When we start to equip a hero, we normally start with his basic attack, let's say with 4500 attack. Then we add gear with, for example, critical damage or attack. To make it simple, let's say we can either attack 1500 attack or 11 crit damage to our hero. So we compare the numbers to right and below our starting point. In this case, at 4500 attack, at 150% crit damage, we see now by comparing that plus 1500 attack would give us more damage. So we choose to go one field to the right and repeat the comparison step. Before I go into specific gear options, I'll show you what would be the optimal case for balancing out attack versus crit damage. For this I will continue comparing fields in this table to show you how to read these tables. So I continue to compare values, one below my last green marked field and one to the right, and keep marking the fields with the higher damage value. By this we see that stacking up attack to a certain point is more valuable than adding crit damage. After a certain point is reached, both attack and crit damage scale each other up linearly, as shown by the green staircase pattern. In other words, we get a linear relationship between attack and crit damage in a certain optimized scenario, where I calculated damage values with an attack reduction factor of 0.6 for Abyss 1 and a defense of 9000. Here, for every 1500 attack, we want 11% more crit damage. I also did this plot for different defense reduction values and plotted the attack value for each defense penetration value, where crit damage starts to scale equally with attack. By comparing the points where crit damage starts to scale equally, we see that this always happens at 18,900 damage across our defense reduction levels. Also, the attack needed to reach this point falls off linearly, with increasing defense reduction. This already gives us a good general understanding of how attack and crit damage scale with each other. But let's get a bit more specific. The first question and simplest question to answer is, what is scaling better as a secondary attribute? Attack or critical damage? When we have a look at our gear, we see that when the bar of the secondary attribute gear information screen is filled by 1/5, it gives us, after applying a faction deployment bonus of 50%, around 153 attack. Crit damage as a secondary attribute gives us 9% crit damage, per 1/5 filled bar. To make both values easier to compare with our table, let's calculate how much attack on a gear is the equal amount of 11% crit damage by dividing 153 by 9 and multiplying it by 11. So we find an attack value of around 187, which is with the attack reduction factor of 0.6 from Abyss 1 and a crit damage value of 150%, only a damage gain of 168.5. Now let's go to Excel sheet and compare the differences between 150 and 161% crit damage and see when the difference exceeds the 168 damage. Because this is the point where crit damage becomes more efficient than attack on our gear. In the example where I calculated damage from attack and crit damage for a defense penetration value of 0.3, we see here marked in dark red that at 13,500 attack, crit damage is already more valuable than attack as a secondary attribute. With increasing defense penetration, the total attack amount we need until crit damage gets better than attack also decreases. Because the attack value where crit damage becomes stronger than attack is close to the attack value that is needed to deal the minimum of 5% damage against the target, I would suggest as a rule of thumb that crit damage as a secondary attribute with a crit rate of 100% is nearly, in all cases, the better option. Now let's talk about the scaling of crit damage gear and attack bonus gear, or more exactly at which point is it worth it to use 66% crit damage over 66% attack bonus. I bet the following numbers will change the opinion of some of you about this topic, because I often heard this hero deals enough damage anyway, doesn't need more attack, and he can go for crit damage directly. This is likely because he has a high base attack value already, or a good amount of defense penetration. Well, in case he has a high base attack value, this actually means he scales better from attack bonus than from crit damage than other heroes with low base attack. But let's showcase this with a couple of examples. For this I took common base attack values in the range from 4500 to 7500 in 1000 steps. To calculate the attack gain from equipping attack bonus gear, I multiplied the base attack by 0.66 and afterwards applied a 50% faction deployment bonus, which of course results in even higher attack gains for heroes with higher base attack. Since I work in my tables in 11% crit damage steps to represent more easily the damage gains from 66% crit damage gear, I need to calculate the damage gains from attack bonus gear with 150 and 260%, so I can compare the damage gains from attack bonus with the gains from crit damage gear, shown at the bottom of the table. To calculate the damage gains from 66% attack bonus gear with 150 and 260% crit damage, I multiplied the attack gains by the attack reduction factor of 0.6 and afterwards multiplied the value once by 1.5 and once by 2.16. To find the breaking points in my table at which it is more worth it for a hero to go for crit damage over attack bonus, I again gone step by step through the table and searched for the points where the damage difference between 216 and 150% crit damage for their respective attack values exceeds the calculated damage gain from the calculated attack from the attack bonus gear. Here it is also worth to mention that you need to search in the table for the correct defense penetration you have in the fight, else the results become inaccurate. Also, the table only gives an orientation for heroes with fluctuations in the amounts of defense penetration. But back to the point where crit damage is stronger than attack bonus. In the table I marked orange, where for a base attack of 4500 a 66% crit damage ring starts to give more damage than a 66% attack bonus ring. I also marked the values from 5500 up to 7500 with different colors, as shown here. Now we can see that heroes with their base attack gain more damage from attack bonus gear than heroes with lower base attack. And therefore crit damage gear becomes more efficient early on for heroes with lower base attack. When we take the orange colored fields as an example, the first colored value in the table is the point where the first crit damage gear piece gives more damage than an attack bonus gear piece. And accordingly, the second orange colored field is the point where second crit damage gear piece gives more damage. With increasing defense penetration, the attack value at which it becomes worth it to go for crit damage gear decreases. Therefore, only in rare cases where the defense penetration is extremely high, crit damage as a primary attribute becomes more worth it over attack bonus, while crit damage as a secondary attribute mostly ever scales attack out. In case you wonder now, why is not every hero following the optimal calculated route, and why do some start to gear crit damage earlier than others? Well, that's because in a real case, we have to work with what the game is giving us, and can't say we just gear 1500 attack and afterwards 11% crit damage. Instead, we must choose either a crit damage or attack bonus gear piece, and these give different values for different heroes. Therefore, the perfect gear combination is different for every hero. Now I want to briefly summarize the results. First of all, in an ideal scenario, where we can fine-tune how much attack to crit damage we take, attack scales better up to a certain point, which is determined by the defense of the target. If this point is reached, attack and crit damage scale linearly with each other. Since not every hero scales equally with attack bonus, heroes with higher base attack profit more than heroes with low base attack from attack bonus. Therefore, stacking crit damage seems more valuable for heroes with low base attack. If a hero has enough attack after deployment, still must be calculated for each individually, depending on the total defense penetration the team has in which he is deployed. The next important finding is that with increasing defense reduction on the target, heroes start to scale positively from crit damage already at lower attack values. The last point, and I think is the most practical point, is that in most cases, when a hero is above the 5% damage mark, it is nearly always worth it to go for crit damage as a secondary attribute, rather than taking attack in case we need to decide between one of them. Also, it could be possible that attack becomes the weakest stat of all on endgame gear, where we need health points to survive encounters. I hope I could give you a better understanding how crit damage and attack scale with each other. In case you hope for an answer that is applicable to each hero, I hope you are not disappointed. But I had to take a more general route to explain it, because every hero is different. Else I would need to exercise through a lot of different examples, which I think should come after understanding the general idea. I also think the video is already packed with enough stuff, so in case you need more concrete examples, I can do this in the future too. If the information was overall useful for you, or you enjoyed the video, consider to like and subscribe, and most of all, have a nice day.